Welcome to Psyche Magic, a podcast about self-discovery and the subconscious, where we explore the symbolic language of dreams, tarot, and archetypes. I'm your host, Jordan Hale. I'm a psychotherapist based in Nashville, Tennessee. Each episode, I'll hold a casual conversation with various artists and healers about their shadow work practices. We pull tarot cards, unpack a significant dream or dream theme, and discuss their personal healing arts practices. So please grab a cup of something delicious and stay a while. While aspects of this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is never meant to take the place of therapy. Welcome back to Psyche Magic. I hope you have enjoyed a gorgeous, if sweltering, summer. At the time of this recording, I am standing on the precipice of motherhood, attempting to prepare practically, mentally, physically, and emotionally to give birth to my daughter tomorrow. I cannot believe she will be here in just a few short hours, and I could not be more excited to step through this portal. I would be lying if I had said I hadn't already checked out a sneak preview of her birth chart, though we will of course need an accurate birth time, for this little fellow water sign, Cancer Sun. I am so incredibly thrilled at the idea of getting to know her and watching her personality unfold. My goal is to try to be curious as much as possible, to check my projections, and to remain committed to making the world as safe and loving of a place for her as I possibly can. I hope to keep up with the podcast even in the early stages of motherhood. Whether this goal is completely delusional remains to be seen. I hope you'll give me grace and stick around no matter how it shakes out. In case you missed it, you can now find all of our content on Substack. There we have the entire archive of the podcast, all of our bonus minisodes, and my personal essays where I write about nature-based spirituality and sources of creative inspiration, with both free and paid subscriber options. So if you want to keep up with all we have going on during this wild time, be sure to follow along with us there if you haven't already. That link is psychemagic.substack.com. I'm really jazzed about this episode. Today's guest, Judy Balan, tackles a topic that I have been dying to delve into on the show: Jungian astrology. Yes, Carl Jung himself was a big-time astrology nerd. And remember, this was back in the old days when you had to do a whole bunch of math in order to cast a birth chart. So if you were into it, you weren't just dabbling. And I think it's fair to say that Jung was not messing around with this stuff. In his own words, quote, "In cases of difficult psychological diagnosis, I usually get a horoscope in order to have a further point of view from an entirely different angle. I must say that I very often find that the astrological data elucidated certain points which I otherwise would have been unable to understand." Unquote. As we can glean from snippets like these, his methods were about enhancing self-discovery and moving towards more integration of the psyche, not about, quote, predicting the future or one's own fate via these types of wisdom traditions. You'll hear Judy refer to the psychologist and astrologer Liz Green throughout the interview as a mentor and teacher, and a robust resource she is indeed. In fact, Green was given access to Jung's private records by his family, perhaps most heavily cited in her book, Jung's Studies in Astrology: Prophecy, Magic, and the Qualities of Time. Sounds right up our alley, no? Judy discusses these influences as well as her own excellent book, Why Am I Like This? A Journey into Psychological Astrology, in depth in our interview. And let me just tell you, you're in for a treat. You might want to have your notebook and birth chart handy for this one, folks. In case you've never done it before, you can cast your chart for free on another favorite astrologer's website, Chani Nicholas. So now, without further ado, let's get into our interview with Judy Balan. All right, Judy Balan, welcome to Psyche Magic. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thanks so much, Jordan. It's been really looking forward to chatting with you. Thank you.
Yes, me too. We made it happen, didn't we, Judy?
Yes.
Because our time zones are quite difficult.
Right.
I am in Central Time in the US, and you are in Indian Standard Time in India. So it was quite a feat to find a time that worked for us both, but we did it.
Yes.
Yay, us. So, Judy, just to start us off, I would love if you would just introduce yourself for the listeners. Just let them know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Judy Balan, and I'm a writer. And I'm also a psychological astrologer, mostly a student of depth psychology, Jungian psychology specifically, and astrology, and, just really fascinated by the intersection of all of these worlds, mythology and fairy tales and dreams and, just psyche and cosmos and magic and astrology and just all of these things. It's an endless rabbit hole, right? I think I see myself more as a student and of these fields, because I don't really think there's any point where you become an expert at these things.
Yes.
And also, where's the fun in that? I don't know what I would do if I had nothing more to learn in these fields. I also wrote a book recently, I think a year and a half ago, on psychological astrology. And it's also, it's just sort of introducing psychological astrology, mostly to an Indian audience, because most people here have not really encountered Jungian astrology. So that, and it's also sort of opens up into a memoir section, which then it sort of talks about just how I encountered astrology and Jung and sort of takes it from there. It's nothing new. I've not tried to do anything new with it. It's more like a breaking down of, all of these concepts that are already there and just trying to get as much as possible into one introduction.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to talk all about your book because it is phenomenal. And I have enjoyed it so much because listeners, as you can hear, as Judy is talking about this, these are all of our favorite things. You're saying all of our favorite words strung together into one sentence because this is my world. This is my lane. I love the fact that when you start diving into the sort of depth waters of Jungian thought and symbolic thought, it's never ending. And that makes me so, so happy because I come from a background of very sort of high control, high demand religion early in life. And it was the opposite. It was like, there is only one way to think and perceive that is correct. And if you're not following that way, you are misguided. And so this style of thinking has brought so much freedom for me. And so I love hearing you talk about being an eternal student. That's just so lovely. And I feel the same way. So we are going to learn and grow together today, Judy. And I'm very, very excited about it. All right, let's pull our tarot card. Now, are you a tarot practitioner? Do you enjoy tarot?
Yes, of course. I love it. It's not like one of the services that I offer or anything, but it's just something that I really enjoy and something that I do almost every day.
So it's a part of your sort of daily rituals, practices.
Yes.
Yeah. I love hearing that. I'm the same way. Of course, I go through phases where I'll kind of drop off for a little bit and then pick it back up. But for me, it's just a great way to ground into what's something that I can be thinking about or a symbol I can be holding that is meaningful to me right now. So let's see what we got. I went ahead and pre-shuffled the deck.
What deck are you using, by the way?
Well, on the show, I always use the Rider-Waite-Smith sort of classic. Yes. Yeah. Because I feel like that's just such a great learning deck. And it's a great one for me to describe to listeners who might not be familiar with tarot. But in my own practice, I use all kinds of different decks.
Right.
I always have a favorite like flavor of the month. Oracle decks too. I mean, I love them all. But yes, we're playing with Rider-Waite-Smith today. Okay, so the card that we pulled, I love this card. I wonder what you'll think about this one. We pulled Strength today, Judy.
Oh.
Lovely, lovely card. I will just describe it to the listeners, but it is Major Arcana energy, card 8 in the Major Arcana series. And it features this woman. She is in this beautiful white gown, robe, adorned with lots of flowers. She has like a little flower crown, and she is sort of petting, embracing this lion. And the lion has his tongue out. He's just like happy. And so they're in this very calm, sort of loving, engaged position. And she has a infinity symbol above her head. So, Judy, just quick hot take on this card. Like, what does it do for you right now, today?
Right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very like on the nose right now.
Okay. Okay.
So when I had just sent you that email before showing up for the session, right? I mean, for the podcast, right? So we had rescheduled.
Yeah.
We had another session before. I mean, we had it last month, I think, which we had to reschedule because I've just had a time with Saturn's opposition to my sun. And like it's been either I'm falling and breaking something, or I'm like, food poisoning, or it's like a tooth extraction or something, right? Like, so I literally felt weak all day. Like I've been weak, right? Really weak. It really took a lot of, I mean, I really wanted to make it to this. But I missed this because I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. And I said, no, we're doing this time. So it just took that I think the strength or inner, the push on sort of just punching, just that one stroke of will to, make it.
I'm with you.
Then I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be, and I am fine right now, right? You can sort of feel that, feel the strength.
Yes, but just having to summon a little bit of something from somewhere because of that will, that desire to show up, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Judy. I know. We'll get back to Saturn opposing your sun. That could be an interesting example just to give to listeners about the way that astrology can impact your daily life. So we'll come back to that. But I agree. This is a very significant card for me right now. I was sharing with Judy before we started recording that I am literally about to give birth in like 4 days. So I'm going to be summoning a lot of strength as well, because I'm doing something brand new. I'm becoming a parent for a first time, and it's like exciting and terrifying. But yes, I love this card. I feel like there's something about, I mean, if we're looking at the symbolism of it, there's something about the symbol of the lion, which is the king of the jungle and can be such a fearsome creature. But in this context, the lion is so gentle. And so there's this like quiet power in this card that I think it can be a very sort of underutilized, underrated way of looking at strength, where there's a gentleness to it. And so I really
strength, isn't it? Like archetypal. It's a different kind of power. It's a different kind of strength. It doesn't come from force, or it's not her approach to the lion. It's like, it's very different the way she approaches the lion, and the lion submits because it's not dominance,
Right.
It's reciprocity, and there's a relationship between her and the lion, right?
She's
like
not holding a whip and a stool and trying to,
she's not
tame it. They're in reciprocity, right?
Yeah.
And that to me kind of captures the essence of the infinity symbol as well, right? Is that there's this like ongoing reciprocal balance of energies in this card that I would say, I would agree, is a more sort of archetypally feminine way of holding strength, one of the sort of feminine gifts, perhaps. Okay, I'll hold this card here so we can see it. So if there's any more little messages that it whispers to us during the conversation, we will hold them. Okay, so let's talk for a second about Saturn opposing Sun. Tell me just your quick take on that transit. Is that like a long-term transit? How does that typically play out? Like, how would you just like incorporate that into your sort of daily life of noticing that this transit is on the horizon? And then what would that mean to me? Like, how would I prep for that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a long-term transit because
Yeah.
Saturn is a moving planet, right?
Yeah.
So to the minute, so I have the sun at 9 Virgo,
Yeah.
and we're using like a 10-degree orb, which is, for an opposition, it's a hard aspect, right? So
Okay.
right now it would be just the widest orb, but it's at 19 degrees and it's just retrograded, right? So Saturn entered Pisces in March
Mm-hmm.
2023. So last year, March 7th, if I'm so I just remember it simply because it was so telling, right?
Yes.
And the minute it entered the sign, even though at 0 degrees, it's still like 9 degrees in opposition, it's a wide orb.
Yeah.
You're going to feel that even if you don't have planets in a particular sign, you're going to feel the shift of slower moving planets. If you're in tune and if you're listening and if you're just noticing, you're going to feel that shift when it moves into another sign.
Yes.
So here in opposition, I'm already sort of like, yeah, I know what this is going to be like, in the sense that, just to be clear, at least in the way that I use astrology, like psychologically, I'm talking, you can understand the archetypal flavor of the transit, symbolically what this is going to be like. And you can guess if you want to,
Sure.
what concrete situations might, show up, what you might be dealing with, but it's never really that helpful. Even if you know everything, you're going to experiencing that as a whole other thing, right? Like I was definitely prepared for it mentally, but it is another thing going through it. Now, again, we have to remember with transits, especially when we're talking about something like Saturn, it already has it gets a lot of bad press, right? So
I know it does.
It's not fair. I mean, with all the planets, you have at one level, when you're looking at prediction, you have the teleology or the big picture meaning of that transit and what it's trying to work out in you and what it's trying to doing. What is its purpose? What is its meaning? Is it really malefic in that sense? Or is it just has its own signature style of working things out in you, right? And so when we describe Saturn as malefic, we're usually referring to how we experience that transit subjectively. So yes, so Saturn does certain things. It's just the language of Saturn, or the style of Saturn to delay, to cause constriction, to bring about heavy. Then so there's a lot of, you might be dealing with a lot of no's. You just get you have another hoop to jump through. You have, just more obstacles, more delays, more
like friction, like growing pains a little bit,
absolutely.
Right?
It's growing pains. It is, right? It is Saturn's task. When you're looking at the teleology, Saturn's task is to bring us to maturity.
Yeah.
That is its purpose, right?
So cool.
Yeah. So when it is opposing someone's sun, you're looking at your very I amness, your individual essence, and what you are here to become and radiate. And when we look at the sun as not as these ready-made qualities that we already have, but something that you're here to cultivate consciously and strive and struggle and become, then this transit becomes a huge part of that becoming, right? So it is long drawn out, and it does feel like it's, even much longer than the time that it takes, simply because of all the challenges that you're going to encounter. It's also about the individual's relationship with a particular planetary archetype, right? Like how you experience it is also going to depend on your psychological, how much you've integrated that Saturn principle in your life so far. So if I have a troublesome relationship with this archetype, then it's more likely that I'm going to struggle much more than someone who is, let's say, a Capricorn sun who is going through, an opposite. They're still going to struggle. They're still going to have the same tests and trials and whatever, but their capacity to lean into it or to integrate it or to allow it to happen or to just accept it might be a lot more than someone who hasn't quite worked that much with Saturn. That is and this works across the board for all the planets, right? So
yes, but it makes sense that based on our individual charts and signatures and, gifts and challenges present within each of our charts, that we're going to have certain planets and signatures that feel more harmonious in general than others, right? Of course.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. And I will just add, while we're talking about Saturn, that I too remember the shift of Saturn moving into Pisces in 2023. I remember this because I have my sun in Pisces. So Pisces is a very important realm.
So you have a conjunction.
Yes.
So you have conjunct your sun.
So it's conjunct my sun. Exactly. And this is my fifth house of my chart,
Right.
which is all about, creativity and sort of cultivating your passions, but it's also the realm of children. And
Yes.
I remember that was the time when my partner and I started trying to have a child, is
Right.
that Saturn is moving into this part of my chart. We've got big lessons to learn and
Uh-huh.
hold here. And so now that's been kind of the essence of this signature, has been like moving into pregnancy and like becoming
Yeah.
a mom, which makes sense because Saturn's about
Yes.
like the serious, real stuff of life,
Yes,
right?
taking the fifth house seriously, right? Like I mean, it's such a contradiction there because the fifth house is like the fun house and it's
Play and
strength,
fun.
it's Leo, right? Like it's very much like the strength card that you just pulled because it's like that combination
Yes.
of Leo and Saturn. It's like
Mm,
really taking fun seriously, like taking the
yeah.
archetype of the child seriously. Like so there's
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, isn't that
yeah,
interesting? Man, you can see how we could just talk about this stuff
yeah.
forever and ever, and never run out of things to say, which is why it's so fun. Thank you for that, Judy. That's so helpful to just take a small example and just
Yeah.
unpack it. And you're
Yeah.
so good about doing that in the book too. There's a couple of little exercises and things that we'll kind of make note of that can be really fun to play around with, use, try, because astrology can be daunting. There's so much. So it's useful to kind of zoom in a certain way for a little
Yeah.
bit and just work with something, even just one small
Something small. Yeah.
signature or
Yeah.
placement. Yeah. And just
Exactly.
let that feed the rest of your.
Yeah, it's kind of like a slow cook, you know,
Yes.
you want to really get into one symbol. Just take
Yes.
one planet, one sign, one house, and then you sort of allow that to cook and get a
Precisely.
sense. Yeah.
Precisely. I love that. Okay, so now let's transition and let's talk about your dream, Judy,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
it's just such a good one. So, this dream is featured in the book for listeners who want to follow along. It's from page 83 of the book.
So the book is called Why Am I Like This? A Journey into Psychological Astrology. So yeah, I think
And we will link to this everywhere in show notes and on socials and all of that good stuff. So yeah, Judy, feel free.
all right.
Give us a little
Okay.
synopsis of the dream and then we'll unpack it.
All right. So I had this dream in February of 2017
Yeah.
when, so the context is that I was just beginning to take astrology really seriously. I mean, not take astrology, it was more like it had consumed me, right?
Yeah.
I had no choice in the matter. And I was struggling because I wasn't ready to come out as someone who was, because even my books, I had always bought books on Kindle because I didn't want anyone to see that I was
Oh,
taking it
yes.
more than, as anything more than a guilty pleasure, right? So,
Mhm.
but by now I was very much in the thick of it. And I was struggling with this inner sense of pressure that was building up and I
Yeah.
tolerated, right? Like it was a real conflict of opposites within. And that is when I had this dream where, and it still stands out as one of
Yeah.
the those big dreams that I've
Big
had.
dream.
And so in the dream, I'm now for context, I am Indian, by
Yeah.
origin, nationality, where I reside, everything, right? So,
Yeah.
and in the dream, I am a white woman,
Yeah.
about 27 years old. I'm dreaming this at around age 35. So I look about 27. I'm a white woman, but I'm experiencing the woman as I am experiencing the dream as it's happening to me. And the sense of place this is medieval Europe. And we're in some kind of underground prison type situation. And I'm wearing these hooded outfit and it's dirty. It looks like
Mhm.
it's made of sackcloth, all of that. And there's a lot of this sense of being pursued. And so the dream also comes up very clearly with these statements, right? So it says, I have been captured with my friends, a group of young men, by the authorities of the time
Yeah.
for big secrets.
You said stealing big secrets, right?
Yeah.
That's so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the men are somewhere being tortured in another chamber, and I am about to make my escape. So I can't save them, but I'm trying to get out. And as I'm getting out, these They're following me. I can hear the footsteps, but I'm still managing to take a moment to steal these old parchments
Mm-hmm.
and sort of hide them in my girdle. And I'm just making my way out. And the way the prison is built is such that if prisoners try to escape, they're going to end up in the wilderness
Mm-hmm.
where they'll be eaten by wild animals. But
Ah.
again, there is a statement in the dream where I have a gift for scattering my scent so
Mm.
that the animals cannot pursue me. And so the next thing I know, I have escaped and now find myself in a city, right? Like it's just any city, a modern present day city in the middle of traffic. And I'm standing there holding these parchments to my chest, feeling all anguished, and I'm setting sun. And I'm thinking, now that I've made my escape, I must go back in there and save my friends.
Mm.
But in that moment, there is this recognition that going back in there means certain death. And by then, the friends may have been killed anyway. And at this point, there is this voice that I hear, a disembodied voice from heaven
Mm-hmm.
that says, this is a past life story that was not resolved.
Mm.
It must be resolved in this lifetime.
Wow.
And that's it. I wake up. So
Wow.
that's the dream.
Incredible. I can see why it was one that really stood out, really stuck with you, that you wanted to feature, because it just has such intense themes.
Yeah.
And I'm especially interested in this idea of a dream that can sort of reflect a past life struggle or journey that we are still integrating, right? Like that
Yeah.
as we move throughout these different life incarnations, whether or not you believe in that literally, there's something to be said for what are the lessons that I have come here to work with and unpack.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, I'm so curious about your sort of idea or kind of internal integration of this stealing big secrets concept and the parchment. I'm curious how you have made sense of that for yourself and how you would sort of characterize that symbol now, if that's something that you want to share or talk about.
Sure. I mean, I think it's quite a common symbol in dreams like this, or at least that's what it's like whenever there is this sense of consciousness, like an upgrade in consciousness, or you're just waking up, the big awakening that is happening internally, right? Like, which is also sort of reflected in the transits. And like, this is something I've heard before as well. In almost every astrologer origin story, there is a Uranus transit involved.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a Uranus transit or progression. I had both. And it does feel like that because Uranus sort of symbolizes that sense of cosmic knowledge, like a higher octave of Mercury, right? Like, so it's not really knowledge from here, but it's like, it's like sacred geometry or like sacred, you're studying something that is bigger. And I was sort of dealing with that at the time. It was like, how can I know this? So it's also very, the sense of sin, right? Like, which is, and I also come from a Catholic background.
Okay.
There is always that sense of, and this is something I learned after the dream because I hadn't yet delved into the Jungian world at the time. It was, I was familiar with Jungian concepts through Liz Green, which is, the astrology that I was studying was, exclusively Liz Green. And so I was already familiar with Jungian theory to, vaguely, but not with structure. And I was meaning to get into it. But this dream was really that final push, like, this is it, I'm going to go. And there I discovered, as I was reading these books, that every time there is this birth of consciousness, there is this sense of the new, the psyche, the unconscious, there's always this experience of a crime being committed or like you're leaving, right? Like you have stolen something, there's some act of disobedience or like you are leaving Eden, or there is that sense of
eating from the tree of knowledge, right?
Right. So there is that sense of coming to consciousness, being equated with that. And then that is from the Christian, the parallel, but you also look at in a Promethean sense, because Uranus is again associated with the myth of Prometheus and stealing fire. Right.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this amazing book, again, Liz Green, The Art of Stealing Fire.
Green. Yeah. Okay, The Art of Stealing Fire. Good, we'll link to that.
Yeah. That's all about about Uranus in the horoscope, but she really goes into the myths in a way that no one else can.
Wow.
there is that Promethean fire stealing, which is, so he steals the fire, but there's consequence for that fire stealing. Even though he doesn't steal it for himself, there is consequence, there is guilt, isolation as a price to pay. So he has to pay, and he actually has this whole, with Zeus sending the eagle to like feed on his liver. And
Oh,
there's that
yes.
whole, so there's the sense of punishment and consequence and guilt and crime and, you know, all of that that is bound up with the Uranian experience, and which is something I was experiencing unconsciously, but profoundly at an internal level, because I come from a very devout Catholic background. Like my
Yeah.
mother is a Catholic priest. So we are really
Yeah.
super in that world, right? But I didn't feel, so the crime here was that on the one hand, I was seeing this work.
Yeah.
I wasn't playing with the theory of astrology. I was seeing it work. I was testing it out. I was experimenting with it. I was playing with it. I was
Absolutely.
come alive and sort of blow
Living
my mind.
it. Yeah.
Living it, right? And I'm seeing it and I was like, oh my God, what does this mean, right? Because
Yeah.
that means that your view of the world has got to change. It's got to change.
This
And it's already
changes
changing,
everything. Yes.
right? So it's already changed. It's already changing. And you are in the throes of that instability, the ground literally being like, you know, pulled from beneath your feet. And that is the Uranus transit. So
Wow.
that's what was going on. So I think the stealing of I was experiencing it in that intensity, which is why the images are so charged, right? Like there's
Yes.
this thickness about it. There's a lot of importance, like, oh, you're stealing these secret parchments.
I
and you're like,
know.
ego is like experiencing it as this big journey through the underworld.
Like
And
the stakes are like so high.
very high.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But nothing is happening in the outside world. Nobody's coming for me, or like, you know, there was
Exactly.
intensity of my fear of, you know, just coming out was so much, because on the one hand, I felt, or at least that is how I thought, that I would pay for this in isolation, because that is the Promethean price. I'm going to pay for this in isolation because no one's going to get this.
Yeah.
Family is going to come from a Catholic lens, and my friends who are more rational, hyper rational, are going to come at it from a, oh my God, like really, you know, and either way, I'm going to face separation and isolation and shame and ridicule and punishment and all of that. But that was my inner fear. It turned out that wasn't the case at all. It was just it was the intensity of the projection that I was experiencing.
You even mentioned, I believe in the book, some, you know, maybe sort of reverberations of some collective unconscious material of, say, things like the witch burnings in more ancient times, which can absolutely be a factor in the way that our unconscious is processing some of this material.
Yeah, because that is so that's the collective layer, which I think in Jung you have that. You have the collective unconscious, like the layer of the psyche that is farthest from the ego, right? Like farthest from consciousness. And it is one layer that we share with all human beings who have ever lived, who will ever live. And so you have access to these experiences that you haven't actually directly experienced yourself, right?
Exactly.
So when you're looking at the natal chart as well, you're looking at these archetypal affinities, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really your personal experience, but there is this deep, if a person has this deep affinity with something from the past, something like what I'm referring to there is like all of these, you know, secret societies, or like, you know, witch burnings, or, you know, things that have happened historically in the past, so far away in the past, has nothing to do with your present life. But archetypally, it has to do with Uranus, the story of Uranus, or the story of Atheist, right? So, and when you're going through that, your own identification or your ego's identification with that archetypal principle can be so charged. And without this knowledge, it can be dangerous, because then you start to identify. And when the ego identifies with something archetypal, it's destructive. You cannot identify with an archetype. You're too small for that. Right?
Yeah.
So it is destructive.
Yes, I can see how in this particular type of example, that could give way to a sort of warped oversensitivity, or even kind of victim mindset, right? Everyone's after me and I'm alone, even in moments where that is not the case.
not the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you take us through your sort of understanding of this dream and the way that it unfolded, but you also take us through your real life process of coming out and how that was sort of the culmination of this dream.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if there's anything about that you would like to share, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, when I set out to write this book, it was supposed to be just a book about psychological astrology. It was
Yeah.
just, like there was no memoir.
Yeah.
And I did not. And I experienced a lot of resistance to writing the memoir, which is strange because I had always been like this blogger. Like I'd always written the personal essays, like my favorite
Sure.
genre. Like I'm not at all a private person, not at all, right? I'm very comfortable processing my deepest, darkest thoughts publicly. I have no problem with that. And so it was bizarre, this resistance that I had to the memoir, because I couldn't write the book. It turned out I just couldn't write it, and was getting delayed. And my editor had suggested that I begin with like just tell us how you got into this, right? And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that, because
Yeah.
the resistance was that I don't want anyone to know about this weird experiences.
It's uncomfortable. Yeah.
So uncomfortable, right? So especially the religious phase and all of that. So I had sort of packed that off, and it's ridiculous because even though I was very much steeped in Jungian studies, I was separating myself from that side as if
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Shadow, right? Like we're
There
not
you go.
gonna claim
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So you're constantly swinging from one extreme to the other when you don't make room. And it was miraculous the way it happened, where I had actually written about 25,000 words of the book, which I just deleted completely because it was just like I was just trying to sound like Liz Green.
Oh,
And
yes.
oh my gosh, like just, I ended it. And then when I allowed myself to write the memoir, and I was shocked by what came out, because
Wow.
I know that is what wanted to be written. And I was, in a way, I could make sense of it only when I wrote it. Like I hadn't
Yes.
really put the pieces together about
I
my
relate to
connection
that.
to astrology and what had happened within the Catholic background, the charismatic renewal, those psychic experiences, and all of those things that I couldn't make sense of suddenly started to make sense when I sort of connected the dots through the memoir.
Yes.
And it was beautiful because after that, the writing just happened. It just flowed.
Yes.
You write that. That is it's kind of like that, it's very mythical, right? Like it's, you don't get to enter the cave. You have to make that little, so you have to
that
shed
little
that
leap of faith.
right? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You do that and then you get in. So
it's so true. And you had to find the strength, the bravery within yourself to enter that territory. But then how beautiful that was the catalyst that just unlocked the rest of it, was that personal element.
So strange that now, right, to me, they actually say that it was the memoir that got them to read the book, that
there you go.
That's the part that really connected with a lot of people. And I was, okay, we don't know what,
This was the way that this needed to happen, both for me and to reach the audience that I am meant to reach.
Yeah.
That's so inspiring, Judy. I love hearing that.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
And so you mentioned that part of the, I keep wanting to use the word fallout. I'm like, that's not the right word. It wasn't a fallout.
I think I have used that word in the book. Maybe that's why.
Part of the journey of this dream was you're actually coming out and getting to have that sort of corrective emotional experience of people responding and not shunning you as the fear of isolation had whispered in your ear that was what would happen. But that wasn't the case at all.
That wasn't at all, because I wrote this article immediately after the dream. It's not like I had made any sense of it, rationally, because I was sitting with a lot. I had no idea how to process it. But there was this inner pressure that was sort of building up, and that was reflected by the dream, that was reflected in the transits. Yes. And then I felt this sort of impelled to just go and release that pressure by
Yes.
writing sort of confessional, sort of a coming out piece. And I just posted it like, on whatever, Medium or something. And then it just so happened that everyone, the very people that I had associated with that sort of, like these are the people, but they were all so open. And it's not like they believe this or they agree with this or none of that. They were so open and they just really could see that this was coming from an authentic space. And that was the real, wow, this was all just my unconscious doubt that was projected on the church or these people or those people, it's never about the other, right? So that was great. And once that happened, once the article was out, I was free of that pressure that had been building up for so long.
What a feeling.
Yeah, because if I hadn't done that, I my guess is that I would have somatized it, right? Like it would have just become a physical thing.
Which is so often the case for us human beings, is that if I'm not managing it, working with it, living into it, it will manifest elsewhere, right? Yeah. In some other form of ailment, difficulty, because there's something that's unresolved. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's such a beautiful story. I just love hearing about the kind of, hero's journey arc of that for you. Okay, let's talk about the book. Let's talk about the different kind of segments of the book and how you chose to lay the book out this way. Because yes, the book begins with this beautiful memoir, and that is the grab, right? That's what pulls us in, because it is so personal and it is so authentic. So we start with that, and then we move into our natal chart as a map of the psyche. And this is where you sort of lay out the Jungian concepts, right? How did you come to incorporate, because you said that astrology was first, right? Mm-hmm. That was the initial gateway into this world, astrology. And then comes the Jungian sort of layer or element. So tell us about how that was incorporated for you and how you decided that Jungian studies would be a part of what you were exploring.
Right. Okay. So when I got into astrology, again, I don't know if it's an ADHD thing or like whatever it is, like I'm actually studying something. I don't know that I'm studying it seriously because I can never tell if something's gonna, last, or it's just like a hobby or whatever, right?
I relate to that so much, Judy, as a fellow ADHDer. It's like, is this a real path for me, or is this a minor hyperfixation that will fade out
or it's
quickly?
Just, like a flavor of the month. And that's totally fine. It's just that we can't really tell. We can't make that distinction, right? Yeah. Because we're consuming each time. And so for me, the litmus test is always Saturn. It's always time that reveals if something is really going to stick or not. I really don't know for myself until, now it's been like 8-9 years since I got into astrology. So there are certain things like astrology, Jung, writing, or like there's certain things that are, the big loves. Yeah. And then there are the other sort of minor loves and the others that are more seasonal, right?
I love that. Yes. The big loves.
Yeah. So with astrology, it was, I was already writing, I was a novelist, but it just sort of happened again. That was something that just happened and I was writing it. But in the middle of all of that, when discovered astrology, and initially it was Susan Miller, who these monthly, someone had sent it to me and I'd read it once, and it was so for that particular time or whatever, it was for someone who didn't have any background in astrology other than, my only level of familiarity was like sun signs. Yeah. So when I saw that, when I read that and it hit me at so many points and it was so specific, I got interested. And eventually I went digging in and I couldn't stop with, interesting. And I got into it. But there was always the sense of, something missing, something more, something missing. It's just a sense of it, right? Yeah. So I kept sniffing around until, because there are just so many genres, so many astrologies, right? Like there are so many branches, so many things so once I found Liz Green,
Yeah.
or psychological astrology as a thing, I was like, yeah, all right, this is my home. Like, and I was drawn to it in a way that, you just know, because once I went into that, I couldn't stop until I read everything there was to read.
Yes.
So I was just devouring those books. And so Jung was, of course, because with psychological astrology, you are essentially, it is the Jungian model of the psyche that you're sort of synthesizing with astrology, because that is the one that has the collective unconscious. You don't have that layer, right? So it goes without saying, when someone says psychological astrology, you can, of course, use all of these different concepts, and you can look at the natal chart through the lens of like something like defenses of the personality.
Sure.
Something like that, stages of development. You can use every psychology available to you, but it's really the archetypal level, which comes from the Jung's theory that really fits, like hand to glove. It just really fits the astrological model, which makes sense because Jung himself did his, did so much. He studied.
I know.
Right. So there is just a lot of that in this. So with Liz Green, the books that I was reading were all like from the mid 90s. They were all transcripts of her seminars in psychological astrology. The audience almost, mainly, psychotherapists or astrologers or both. I was reading all of this, and I already knew the astrology, so I could follow along. But the depth psychology, the Jungian level, the collective unconscious, the archetypes, and what that really means. And, suddenly, you'd come across things like the puer aeternus, or like, you're like, what? I didn't have a sense of what everything meant.
Sure.
It was, making such a difference at a deeper level, where I was like, really, it was like bread, right?
Yes. You're just following these breadcrumbs, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it was really, I was so hungry, and I was really devouring it like that. But I didn't have, if you had asked me to explain it, there was no structure, right? So, and I wanted that. So I knew that Jungian studies was just, it had to happen, because that's the next natural step. But, sometimes you're just so happy sitting in that space where you're just reading more Liz Green.
I know.
And you need something to sort of push you. And that for me was the dream. So I just started devouring all of these books. Again, it was a time when, and especially in India, it was a time when I couldn't find any guidance on this. Now Jung has suddenly, there's this sort of, you can see this topic being so trendy on like Instagram and like YouTube, when you see all these people talking about it. But this was just 2017, and I couldn't find anyone on Instagram. I couldn't, I didn't have any connection.
Isn't that interesting? It wasn't very long ago, but it was not in the zeitgeist the way that it is now. Yeah,
exactly. So I just started reading whatever I could find on like Amazon, right? And now, if you'd ask, like, there are lots of people who ask me, okay, recommend, beginners, books for
where
beginners.
do I start with Jung? I know.
Yeah, but there are some books that would be easier to read in the beginning than, like I started out with, Barbara Hanna and, von Franz. Okay, you can read those fairy tale series.
Sure.
But I would read Barbara Hanna's 2-volume books on a book on the animus, or I was reading all of those really books on active imagination and like, all these deeper concepts, which I didn't really have any sense of structure, but I was reading them because I was just reading whatever I could get. And I still think that what I absorbed in that phase without any structure, that is where the real difference and the transformation and the real learning happened then. And after that, the structure, right? So I wouldn't recommend those books. If someone were to ask me now, what would you recommend? I wouldn't recommend those books, but they still made a difference to me.
Of course.
So for me, Jung was just the next natural step. For me, the two were meant to work together in this. Not that there are no other astrologies, that this was the one that was most impactful for me at the time.
On your own journey. Yes.
On our journey. So I just wanted to dig into that. And then from Liz Green. And Liz Green herself is super accessible. Like, you're really interested, you can just go all of her books. You don't have to, people might assume that, is it going to academic, not at all, right? But I find that most people don't want to read, even when it's not really about that. They just want like just tell me quickly what this is.
Especially these days. Give me the
Yeah.
5 key points I need to know
Yeah.
in a 30-second video, right?
Yeah. So I just felt that maybe not everyone is called to that level of, there's these nerd levels.
Sure.
So it's like maybe not everyone can read 500 pages on Neptune alone.
Sure.
Maybe they can just, read like what would be a good introduction. So my thoughts on the book was basically, what would I have written for myself, right?
Yeah.
Because I was so lost in the beginning and I wasted a lot.
Of course.
Not wasted, but spent a lot of time and it was its own thing. But what if I could make it easier for someone getting into it right now? And that was the starting point. And so I just picked the theories, not the whole of Jungian theory, because that would be too overwhelming, right? So, but I'd really found the complex theory, Jung's complex theory, being so comprehensive and game-changing, right? Like in the practice of astrology. And Liz Green does a phenomenal job of that in her books, but I had to sort of pick out all the different ones that really made an impact on me, stitch them together in this book.
That's right.
For an audience that knows neither astrology nor Jung. Right. So that was the real challenge.
Yes.
So
what a challenge indeed.
Yeah.
And you boiled it down so beautifully as just this sort of primer, right?
Yeah,
which is what we're all looking for, is how do I just dip a toe into these subjects and the way that they sort of feed into each other as tributaries.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so your next section of the book is this beautiful overview of just some relevant Jungian concepts, right? So useful. And then the next segment gets more into depth in terms of the natal chart, the planets, the signs, the houses, right? Looking at these key building blocks of astrology and how they work, right? As core principles.
Yeah.
And then you get into, in the psyche magic world, you get into our favorite part, which is the sort of archetypal perspective on these building blocks and these signs. So this is where we get into, a little bit of myth and just drawing on that work. Like you said, building on like someone like Liz Green.
Yeah.
But taking the archetypal take is so helpful. And you give one example. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was an example of a 12th house placement and how so many astrologers out there, and I encounter this all the time, are so fixated on this sort of predictive idea of astrology, right? You have this placement in the 12th house, say it's your sun in the 12th house. That means that you often feel alone and unseen, and maybe your dad wasn't present, right? And you kind of mentioned that in the book, like these kind of quick take predictive shortcuts that people will give you. And it's so limiting, right? Yeah. So you take that example and then you expand it into, what if we were to look at that placement archetypally, right?
Yeah.
And I think the example you used was a Harry Potter example, right?
I think there's quite a lot of Harry Potter in there.
I know. But it's looking at like, what if this was actually a part of my hero's journey, was my son in my 12th house, and the way that shadow, right, and that sort of potential difficulty or challenge actually opens doors for me in my life, right? In this very unique way. And so I thought that was so beautiful, is can we look at these placements archetypally, symbolically, and open up all these different avenues of meaning instead of just trying to predict. Right?
Yeah, because that's the other thing that Liz Green talks about. And I think that's so useful. It's not that, prediction, what does prediction mean psychologically, right?
Yeah.
Like looking at, so how do we relate to transits and progressions psychologically? How do we, so you're looking at really changes in the psyche. You're looking at these sort of cyclical movements in the unconscious that is constantly taking place. It is the story of your becoming. And you have tool where you are able to move forward and backwards, and you can go and look at what that transformation looks like, but it begins at an inner level and then sort of radiates outside, or maybe it's just all around at the same time. But the point is, the thing to remember with the archetypes is that they operate on a spectrum, right? So the archetype is always a spectrum. So there's always the life-giving point of the archetype, and the other side being the completely destructive or even psychopathic extreme. So it's spectrum, and you have this gamut of expressions in between. So when someone look at a 12th house sun and they say, you've probably experienced your younger, your childhood or like your teens, as you might have felt unseen or misunderstood or just alone. Maybe your father was mad. Things can very well be true.
Sure.
But those are just some of the expressions of the archetypal placement, right? Like, so the 12th house. So that is why, it's important to first understand that the archetype operates on a spectrum, that a symbol has so much within it. And that is where free will comes in, because you get to have some say, if not all, say in how you express these patterns within yourself that are in your chart, right? So that's why I think it's important to hold that balance of, so these are some of the darker, I can give you a ton of dark meanings for Jupiter or like Venus, who are the seeming, benefic. Like when Jupiter is unhinged or Venus is unhinged, it's not pleasant, right?
Sure.
So every archetype has that, and every placement has this. By definition, it just goes without saying that everything in the chart has has this entire spectrum. Every symbol comes with this spectrum, and likewise with transits and progressions. So
that's right.
It's about how much we cooperate or like sort of get in tune with and like dance with these placements and embody them and understand why is something manifesting in a particular way, and how much volition is really available, right? In this. Like, again, another thing that Latrine points out, and it's very true, because sometimes you can think when you psychologize the transit in effectuality, right? Like you can like just do a lot of inner work, and then this bad thing may not happen. And I think that sort of brings us back full circle to the Saturn transit we were talking about at the beginning. I'm like, I can be steeped in inner work and I can still break my foot, and I can, I can have all of these things. But there is meaning in that, and there's a lesson in that, and there's growth in that.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yes, because like you were saying, it all comes back to this idea of individuation and wholeness, right? The culmination of all of these forces within our lives. And it reminds me of the way that I like to work with tarot as well, which is that I don't read the cards in terms of black and white, uprights and reversals. Like I like to see them as a spectrum, like you're saying, where archetypally there is room for all of the blessings and challenges and everything in between with each of these symbols. You're going to laugh, but one of my placements is a Scorpio moon, right? Like a feared placement. I always get those like pitied looks from people. And so I like to think about, what are the blessings and challenges of a placement like this? Like, yes, this can make it.
I mean, look at the name of your podcast. It just sort of says, it's Scorpio moon, right? That's right there.
Psyche magic. Yes. Yeah. Well, but it's so true to say that can this be a difficult placement? Sure. And also, can it push me into some of these deeper realms? Yes, that too. And I would view that as a gift, is that I've become more of a kind of seeker in the underworld because I have energy there that's available to me. And so, I view it as both, I would say. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a quote that I want to read from the book. If you'll just indulge me, Judy, I know this is probably a little amateurish for me to do this, but I can't help it. I know. Yeah, this is my show. I can do whatever I want. That's right. Okay, here we go. You write, I started to realize that, quote, getting better and, quote, curing symptoms was never the point at all. Fascinating as all the theories were, Jung had always drawn me like a magnet with one word, wholeness. And wholeness is not about becoming better or perfect, nor is it about aspiring to some collective standard of what is good, beautiful, or successful. In the Jungian sense, wholeness is about becoming yourself or all that you potentially are by facilitating a dialogue and connection with your unconscious and all the parts of you that are trapped in there. I love this. To me, this is what it's all about. And this is the journey. And this is so much of the letting go, I would say, when we start sort of looking at the world and the internal parts of ourselves this way, in this more expansive way. It's so life-giving. So just had to share that. Just love that.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Anything else that you want to say about the book and just the way that you chose to lay everything out? Anything else you want readers to know and understand? Please feel free. If not, that's okay too. Just making a little space.
No, I mean, that's about it. I think it's just the way the book is arranged, the structure of it is really just about how can I take all of this stuff,
a lot of stuff,
like really break it down in like a Virgo and Sun kind of way,
Yes.
right? Which is really what I was doing, and make it useful in a practical sense, and not
Sure.
just something that you play with, and like when you're in your Jupiter, you're like, it's just beautiful, just sitting with these things, just sort of enjoying the the philosophical side of things. But I wanted to make it practical. I wanted to make this part of your everyday life. I want you to engage with it on a daily basis. I want you to see it come alive for yourself. And so this was really about introducing all my favorite people and their work, and because most people don't really find them accessible, or they just, for whatever reason, just don't read all of those books. So it was really about bringing that work into to whatever audience needed it, and then to just make their way from there. So if someone, I think I see that in the book as well. It's like you read this book and then you feel like if it opens up this rabbit hole, and the job is done, right?
That's right.
So that's it. It's just to make that beginning of that journey easier to navigate, because I didn't have that.
Thank goodness. So, yeah, exactly. Neither did I.
Yeah.
I was just feeling around in the dark for so long.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and it is definitely just the beginning. It is a primer. That's it.
Yes.
Right. So there's so much more to explore in both in astrology and in Jung, and there are many different astrologies. It's not just and they're all fascinating, and it's really worth studying and understanding all of these different fields. So if this is helpful, then so that was my intention, and I hope that's how it's received. But
yes, absolutely. I would say that from my own perspective, that absolutely comes through in the work. What a feat! What an accomplishment! This is why I had to feature this book on the show, because I know so many listeners will love it. Okay, we're running out of time, but I've got just a couple of little follow-up questions for you. So one is, do you have any recommendations in terms of just sort of like routines for incorporating some of this knowledge into your daily life? Like for you, do you sit down and sort of map out all of your big transits and look at them ahead of time? Do you check them daily? Like, what do you recommend for people to just start getting a little bit of this into their sort of daily routines?
Well, I think to get a sense of the archetype itself, whether that is, planetary archetype or, otherwise, I think it's really important to get into, it's a language, right?
Yeah.
And you really need to get a sense of the archetype. You cannot understand it from a book. Cannot have any book list out, everything that would possibly fall under a particular symbol, like the sun or Venus or like, because it's just not possible. You have limited.
And they're too personal. Like you can't.
And you have these 10 heavenly bodies, so including the sun and the moon, and you have literally everything under the sun. You have everything, the whole cosmos that falls within the symbolism of those 10, planets, right? Yeah. So you're going to have to, it's just impossible to list that out in a book. So it's for people to, I think they recommend this exercise in these books, which I think is really useful to when you look at everyday objects, right? Like anything, you're looking at your computer screen, you're looking at your friend, you're looking at this plant that is growing up. Describe it. Which planet rules this thing, right?
Yes.
why, and yes, you can do it with your head, but that is limited, because if you would find invariably that more than one thing comes into the picture.
Of
But that's
course.
good. Develop that sense of the archetype, the
Yeah.
flavor of the essence is really what the archetype is. You can't really wrap your head around an archetypal principle because it's too big.
Yes.
Right? And
Yes.
it reveals itself through archetypal images.
Ugh,
But
that's it. That's
the
it.
archetype and the image are not the same thing, right? So we have
Yes.
to develop a way of, just sort of getting an individual sense, your own sense of an archetype. And you can do that by just looking at everything in the world around you through those eyes, right? Through an
Sure.
archetypal eye, through symbolic eyes. And you just see, what does this mean? Why is this that? And there is this sort of language that this vocabulary that just develops from there.
Yes. It reminds me of, when I'm working with clients on sort of developing their dream work, right?
Yeah.
We will
Yeah.
come up with this kind of archetypal symbolic bank of associations that they start forming around
Yeah.
key symbols that are personal, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes collective. But it is something that I would agree with you that it continues to reveal itself. And I'm also remembering now that you give a great exercise in the book about like personifying a placement. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
taking something like, I think it was a moon in Capricorn, and sort of doing a character study about that placement, right?
Yeah.
Like what makes them tick, and what are their sort of strengths and weaknesses, and what are some of their key like symbols and elements.
Yeah.
So yes, that is a really useful way to just kind of play with these
it's not a way to engage
concepts.
with these symbols, right? So that's the other thing. So because archetypes always come with a universal, or like the universal layer, they already have that layer, which is there in all the myths. It's there in the world around you. It's already there.
Yeah.
And then you have the personal layer. Yeah. But in order for you to make sense of something in your chart, you cannot just stay with the archetypal layer. You're going to have to see in what way it shows up in your life,
That's
right? What are the personal layers? And you have to start there and sort of work your way back to the archetypal level. So, but nowadays there's just so much fascination with archetypes and not enough understanding of what they are.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I don't think we really got a chance to go into that. But it's like this thing of understanding archetypes as abstractions versus the fact that they are actual forces, energies, like that have their tremendous power and autonomy, and to, really gods and goddesses as they were known in ancient times.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that is where the gap is, at least from what I see on Instagram. There's just so much of archetypes understood as abstractions. Yeah.
Oof. Yes, you're so right. You're so right. I know. I wish we had more time. I want to just like freeze, pause time, and just unpack it more. But like you said, that this is a primer. And so we're dipping our toes in, and there's always more. But yes, I don't know about you, but like I love to look at the transits that are happening like in a given week, like just sort of break it down and just try to stay aware of how those things are impacting me throughout the week. So I try to do a little reflection at the beginning of the week. Okay, here's what's coming. And then at the end of the week, okay, now how did I experience those things, right?
Yeah.
Like how did those things show up for me? So it just takes practice and awareness.
And it's a wonderful thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like, I think I do mention that in the book, but it's like you begin with the small, the really fast moving planets. Like, for example, if you have Venus conjunct your sun today, what does that feel like for you? Because that's
what does that feel like?
Experience, right? Like, what does that feel like? What did you do today? Maybe you just went out with your friends and had a really nice time. Maybe you fell in, maybe you were talking to your sweetheart, or you were like, you shopped, you changed your hairstyle. We don't know. It could be something seemingly simple and like, meaningless. But when you're aware and your eyes are open, that is how you learn best, right? Like by observing.
Applying this lens. And just observing how
really getting a sense.
Yeah, because you talk about the fact that it's just a reflection of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Like, how is this reflecting what is happening So yeah, I encourage everyone to pick up Judy's book, Why Am I Like This? A Journey into Psychological Astrology. And of course, we will have links and photos and all those good things for you all. But Judy, I cannot thank you enough for making the time to do this. This was so fun and just the perfect conversation for this particular show. So I so appreciate you.
Glad that, we made it work this time.
Me too.
Just so fun chatting with you. And
it was fun. Yeah. Last thing, can you please just give listeners any guidance on, where to follow you and follow along with your work if they want to do so?
Yeah, I have been very lazy on Instagram, but that is really the only space, the only social space that I'm really active on. Like I have 2 accounts there. My Instagram account is called Jungian Astrology.
Yeah.
Handle is Jungian Astrology. I do have a personal account as well at, I think, Judy.Balan.
Okay.
But Jungian Astrology would be the space where I intend, at least, to do more of this.
Exactly. That's so funny that you say that because I feel the same way. Instagram is something that I engage with sometimes, but not all the time. Yeah. But listeners will love to just give you a follow and just see what comes. So thank you, Judy. We really appreciate you being here. We're excited to see what is next for you. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you so much. I've just had a lovely time.
That's a wrap for this episode. Thank you again to my guest, Judy Balan. May we all strive, as you do, to remain eternal students and to light the way for each other in our quests for big secrets. We'll see you back here next month with another amazing guest. If you want more Psyche Magic, be sure to check out the Psyche Magic Salon on Substack. There you'll find all full and bonus episode archives for the podcast, as well as my weekly written newsletter with magical musings and recommendations for sources of creative inspiration. You'll also find the recorded version of our salon ritual to invoke creative flow. That's psychemagic.substack.com. If you haven't already, please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app of choice. It really makes a difference and helps other people find the show. We hope you'll also follow along with our shenanigans on Instagram and TikTok at Psyche Magic Podcast. Psyche Magic was produced and recorded by me, Jordan Hale. Editing for this episode is by Masuzu Inaga. Our theme music is by Young Summer. Artwork is by Annika Murphy. Special thanks go to Daniel Higbee, Grace Fuse, and Michael McMillan. Thank you so much for listening. I'll leave you with a question. If you must sleep through a third of your life, are you willing to sleep through your dreams too? Get your dream journals out, y'all. Until next time.